found my granddaughter sleeping in her car with a 3-week-old baby when the temperature outside had dropped to 22 degrees. She did not run to me. She pressed herself against the door like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was someone she had been warned about. And when I said her name, when I said Sophie, she looked at me with something I can only describe as terror and whispered, "You're not supposed to be alive." I did not understand those words then. I understand them now. And everything I am about to tell you is the reason I will never again stay silent when someone I love is being kept from me. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 63 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina. And for 4 years I believed my granddaughter had chosen to cut me out of her life. That was what my son told me. He said Sophie had grown up, moved on, and did not want contact. He said I reminded her too much of pain. He said she had asked him specifically to pass along the message that she needed space and that I should respect it. I believed him. That is the part that still sits heavy in my chest when I think about it at night. I believed my own son. I had raised that boy with everything I had. After his father left when he was 9, it was just the two of us. I worked 2 jobs. I drove him to every baseball practice. I sat in the front row at every graduation. When he married, I welcomed his wife with open arms. When Sophie was born, I was in the delivery room. I held her before he did because he was too nervous to move. For the first 12 years of Sophie's life, I was there for everything. Birthdays, first days of school, sick days when her parents worked, summers where she stayed with me, and we baked and read and walked the trails behind my house until her little legs gave out. She called me Gram. She drew pictures of us with crayon and put them on my refrigerator. She told me once, very seriously, when she was about 7, that when she grew up she wanted to live next door to me so she could have coffee with me every morning. Then my son moved his family to Phoenix when Sophie was 13, and something shifted. The calls got shorter, the visits stopped. When I asked to come see them, there was always a reason it was not a good time. Then one day my son sat me down on a video call and told me that Sophie had been struggling emotionally, that a therapist had recommended she limit contact with people who caused her stress, and that, unfortunately, I was one of those people. I was devastated. I replayed every interaction trying to find what I had done. I wrote letters that were never answered. I sent birthday cards that came back unopened. I tried calling Sophie's cell phone once, and my son answered it and told me she had asked him to screen her calls from me, and that if I kept pushing, I would only make things worse for her. So I stopped. Because I loved her. Because I thought loving her meant letting her go. For 4 years I carried that grief like a stone in my pocket. I told myself she was okay. I told myself she would come back when she was ready. I told myself the worst thing I could do was force myself on someone who did not want me. I was wrong about every single part of that. The night I found Sophie, I was not supposed to be in Phoenix at all. I had flown in for a work conference, something related to the non-profit I consult for, and my flight back to Asheville had been delayed by a full day. I had a rental car and a free evening, and on impulse, the kind of impulse that feels less like a choice and more like something pulling you by the collar, I decided to drive past the neighborhood where my son's family lived. I did not plan to knock. I just wanted to see the house. I wanted to feel close to Sophie even from a distance. That sounds foolish when I say it out loud, but grief makes people do quiet, private things that they would never explain to anyone. I was sitting in my rental car about a block away when I saw a vehicle parked under a busted streetlight in the small lot beside a closed laundromat. It was an old grey sedan with a cracked taillight and something hanging from the rear-view mirror. I almost did not look twice, but the windows were fogged in a way that told me there was heat and breathing inside, and it was December, and something in me went cold and alert at the same time. I pulled up slowly and sat for a moment. Then I got out. I knocked on the glass and the fogging smeared and a face appeared and my heart stopped completely. It was Sophie. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a way that looked less like a style and more like practicality, dark circles under her eyes, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her face move through 5 different expressions before it landed on fear. I held up both hands. "It's Gram," I said. "Sophie, it's Gram. I'm not going to hurt you. Open the door." She opened it slowly, and in her arms, swaddled in a fleece blanket from what looked like a gas station bag, was a baby so small my throat closed up when I saw her. Sophie did not hug me. She looked at me the way someone looks at a ghost, not with comfort, but with the specific horror of something appearing that was not supposed to exist. That was when she said it. "You're not supposed to be alive." I asked her what she meant. She could not answer right away. She was shaking, and I could not tell if it was cold or shock or both. I turned the car on and got the heat running, and sat in the back seat with her while the baby slept between us, and piece by piece, Sophie told me what she had been told. My son had told her I had died, not that I had chosen to stop calling, not that I had moved away. He told her, when she was 16, that I had passed away from a sudden illness, that the funeral had been small and private, and that he had not wanted to upset her any more than necessary. He had even shown her what he said was a printed obituary. She had cried for weeks. She had carried that loss for 3 years without anyone to mourn with, because everyone in her life in Phoenix had only known me as the grandmother she never saw. I sat in that back seat and felt the world rearrange itself into a shape I did not recognize. She said she had tried, once, to look me up online, maybe 6 months after he told her I had died. She had found nothing that confirmed I was gone, but also nothing that confirmed I was alive, and she had concluded that he must have just been protecting her from something painful. She had trusted him, because why would a father lie about something like that? I thought about all the birthday cards returned unopened. I thought about my son answering Sophie's phone. I thought about 4 years of silence that I had spent blaming myself. I asked her why she was living in her car. She was 18 by then, had aged out of the house 6 weeks earlier after a fight with her stepmother that had been building for years. Her father had offered her the choice of staying under his rules or leaving. She had left. She had a waitressing job and had been putting money aside, but the baby had come early, a little girl she had named May, and the medical bills had eaten everything. She had been staying in a shelter, but it had filled up, and the car had felt safer for the baby than a crowded floor. I want to be very clear about what I felt in that moment. It was not just sadness, it was not just anger, it was the very specific feeling of understanding, all at once, that someone had engineered this. Sophie's homelessness, her isolation, her belief that I was dead, none of it was accidental. It was the result of decisions my son had made, one after another, over the course of years. I did not say any of that to her that night. What I said was, "We are getting a hotel room right now, and tomorrow we are going to figure out everything else." She hesitated. She asked if I was sure. She asked it like someone who had been told so many times that they were a burden that they now issued warnings before accepting help. I told her I had never been more sure of anything in my life. We got 2 rooms, side by side, with a connecting door. She gave May a bath in the hotel sink, and I went out and bought formula and diapers, and a small soft toy from a drugstore that was still open, a little yellow duck that I put in the crook of May's arm once she was settled. Sophie slept for almost 10 hours. I lay in my own bed and stared at the ceiling, and did not sleep at all. The next morning I made calls. The first was to my attorney back in Asheville, a woman named Patricia, who had handled my late husband's estate and who I trusted completely. I told her what had happened and asked her what my options were. She asked me to give her 24 hours. The second call was to my son. He answered on the second ring, cheerful and casual, and I almost could not speak. I asked him where Sophie was. He said she had moved out and was doing fine, that she had chosen her own path and that he respected that. I asked him whether he had told her I was dead. There was a silence that lasted long enough to confirm everything. Then he said, "Mom, that's not what happened. Things are more complicated than you know." I told him that I was sitting 4 miles from his house, that I had found Sophie and May, and that I intended to find out every complicated thing there was to know. He hung up. Within an hour, his wife called me. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have decided on a strategy. She said my son had only done what he thought was best, that Sophie had been difficult, that I had no idea what their household had gone through, and that I should be careful about inserting myself into a situation I did not fully understand. I listened until she was done. Then I said I would be speaking to my attorney, and I ended the call. Patricia called back that evening. What she had found in 24 hours was not nothing. When Sophie had turned 17, my son had opened a savings account in her name, one meant to hold money my late husband had left, specifically for Sophie in his will. The account had been opened correctly. The deposits had not. Patricia found records suggesting withdrawals over 18 months that could not be accounted for by any legitimate expense. The money had moved into an account connected to a business my son ran as a side venture, a property management LLC that had taken on several investors over the past 2 years. Sophie had not known the account existed. She had never been told about the inheritance. My husband had written it clearly into his will, and my son, as executor, had never disclosed it to her. I sat with that information for a full day before I told Sophie. I needed to find the right words. I needed to make sure she heard it in a way that gave her the truth, without destroying her completely, in a moment when she was already so fragile. I told her over breakfast while May slept in the portable crib the hotel had provided. I told her slowly and clearly, and I watched her face do what Luke's face had done in the story. I had heard once about another grandmother, another lie. I watched her go through shock, then grief, then a fury so quiet it was almost worse than shouting. She asked me why. Not the legal why, not the financial why. She asked me why a father would do that to his own daughter. I did not have a clean answer. I told her what I had come to believe over those days, that some people mistake control for love so completely that they cannot tell the difference anymore. That her father had looked at her and seen not a child but a complication, a claim on resources he wanted, an emotional attachment that cost him things he was not willing to pay. I told her that was his failure, not hers, never hers. Patricia had advised me to document everything before any confrontation, which meant another 3 days in Phoenix, while she coordinated with a local attorney and gathered formal records. During those 3 days, Sophie and I talked more than we had in years. She told me about growing up in that house after the move. She told me about her stepmother's coldness, her father's distance, the way affection was rationed like something scarce. She told me that the worst part was not the unhappiness, it was not knowing why. Because if no one tells you what you did wrong, you start to assume you were wrong simply by existing. On the 4th day, Patricia told me we had enough to request a formal accounting of my husband's estate through the probate court. The moment that request was filed, my son would know we were coming. We decided to meet with him first on our terms, with documentation, with witnesses. I arranged for us to meet at a neutral location, a conference room at the local attorney's office. I told my son it was to discuss estate matters. He came alone, which surprised me. Maybe he thought he could still manage this, the way he had managed everything, with explanations, with reframing, with the particular skill he had always had of making you feel like your perception was the problem. He walked in and saw me, and then he saw Sophie, and for just a moment his face showed something real. I do not know if it was shame or simply surprise. It passed quickly. He said he could explain. My son had been saying he could explain things his entire life. It was practically a greeting. Patricia spoke first. She laid out the estate discrepancy clearly and without drama. The account, the withdrawals, the LLC, the timeline. She placed documents on the table one at a time, the way you would lay out cards in a game where you already know you have won. My son looked at the papers, then he looked at Sophie. He said the money had been managed in her best interest, that he had been reinvesting it, that she would have received it when she was more mature and stable. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "She was alive. You told me she was dead and she was alive the whole time, and I cried for her for months, and she was sending me birthday cards you sent back without letting me see them. What did I do to make you hate me that much?" He did not answer that. He started to talk about context and difficulty and everything he had sacrificed, and the words started to blur together into the sound that entitlement makes when it has been cornered, loud and circular, and full of everyone's name except its own. Sophie stood up. She was holding May against her shoulder, and the baby was awake now, looking around at the room with the calm curiosity that very new babies have, as if the world is still just interesting shapes and light. Sophie said, "I don't need an explanation. I needed a father, and you decided I wasn't worth the effort. I'm done asking you to be sorry for that." She walked out. I followed her. Behind us, I heard my son call my name once. I did not turn around. The formal estate process took several months. Patricia worked with the probate court to establish what had been misappropriated, and the local attorney filed the appropriate claims. My son retained his own lawyer and tried initially to argue that his management of the funds had been reasonable, but the paper trail did not support that position, and eventually he agreed to a settlement that restored Sophie's inheritance in full, with interest. He also signed an agreement releasing him from any further role in estate matters. He did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that, because I know people want that kind of ending, and I cannot give it. What he lost was harder for him. In some ways he lost the story he had been telling about himself. He could no longer be the devoted son, the responsible executor, the father who had managed a difficult situation with wisdom. The truth had a shape now, documented and signed and filed with the court, and no amount of reframing could dissolve it. Sophie and May came back to Asheville with me. She said it would just be for a little while, until she got settled, and I told her there was no clock on the door. May had a room that I had set up in about 48 hours, with a white crib and yellow curtains, and a mobile that played a song my husband used to hum when Sophie was small. The first few months were not easy. Sophie had a lot of unlearning to do. She had been trained, without knowing it, to expect love to come with conditions attached, and so she kept waiting for mine to show its cost. She would do something small, forget to replace the coffee, leave a light on, take too long in the shower, and then go very still, braced for the response she had always gotten. I learned to recognize that stillness. I learned to let it pass, without filling it with anything except the ordinary continuation of the day. Slowly she began to breathe differently in the house. May learned to smile in my kitchen. She learned to roll over on the rug in the living room where I had watched Saturday morning cartoons with Sophie's father 25 years ago, and I felt the strange, layered quality of time when I watched her grief and gratitude sitting side by side, not cancelling each other out but making each other more precise. Sophie found a job she liked, working at a veterinary clinic, which suited her because she had always loved animals, and because it was work that asked something real of her every day. She started taking a few classes at the community college in the evenings. She made a friend named Daria, who had a daughter 6 months older than May, and the two of them would bring the babies to the park on Saturday mornings, while I stayed home and read, and felt, for the first time in years, like the world was running in a direction I recognized. One evening in late spring, Sophie and I were sitting on the back porch after May had gone to sleep. The fireflies were just starting, the early ones, blinking low in the yard the way they do before the real show begins in June. We were not talking about anything important. She was telling me about a dog at the clinic who had eaten an entire sock, and I was laughing, really laughing, and I noticed she was watching me with an expression I could not quite name. I asked her what she was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to dream about you after he told me you were gone. Not sad dreams, just regular ones, you making biscuits, or driving me somewhere, or just sitting somewhere near me, and I would wake up and remember you were dead, and it felt like losing you all over again every single time." I reached over and took her hand. She said, "I think I was grieving you for 3 years, and the whole time you were just in North Carolina making coffee." I laughed even though my eyes were stinging. I said, "I was definitely making a lot of coffee." She squeezed my hand. She said, "I'm really glad you drove past that parking lot." I thought about impulses. I thought about the kind of pull that feels less like a decision and more like something older than logic, something in the body that knows more than the mind has caught up to yet. I thought about all the nights I had told myself she had chosen to leave and that I had to respect it, and I thought about how silence, when it is built by someone else around you, can feel exactly like your own choice. I said, "I should have kept looking. I should never have stopped." She shook her head. "You didn't know." He made sure of that. She was right. But I had learned something I did not know how to unknow, which was this. When someone you love goes quiet in a way that does not sound like them, that silence deserves a question. One more letter. One more drive. One more knock on the glass of a fogged-up window in a cold parking lot, just in case. Because sometimes the person inside is not fine. Sometimes they have been told something terrible about you. Sometimes they are 3 weeks out from delivering a baby alone in December, and they have been carrying a lie about your death for 3 years, and all they need is for you to say their name. May is 8 months old now. She has 4 teeth, and an opinion about every food I offer her, and she has decided that the yellow duck I bought at the drugstore the first night is non-negotiable and must be present at all meals. She calls me something that sounds like Mama, which Sophie says is probably a coincidence, and which I have decided to take as a title. Sophie put a photograph on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. It is one of me and her from when she was about 4, both of us in the backyard of my old house, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I do not remember who took it. I do not remember what we were laughing at. But every morning when I stand at the sink I see it, and I think about how love is not just what you feel, it is what you protect, what you pursue, what you refuse to let someone else define by telling you it does not exist. My husband used to say that the truest things in a family are the ones spoken quietly when no one is performing. I think he meant that real love does not need an audience. It does not need to be announced. It just keeps showing up at the gate, in the parking lot, in the back seat of a rental car at 22 degrees, saying a name into the dark. Sophie heard her name, and she opened the door. If this story moved you in any way, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have ever been separated from someone you love by a lie, tell me about it below, because I think those stories deserve to be told. And I think the people who lived them deserve to know they are not alone.